Welcome. Uh, Good afternoon if you're joining us live, or thank you for watching the recording later. I'm very excited to welcome you all to the launch of Aggie and Mudgy by Wendy Proverbs. My name's Monica, and I work at Heritage House Publishing, and we're thrilled to have published Aggie and Mudgy. I'll just gonna go over some housekeeping things, and then I'm gonna hand it off to Wendy and our host, Catherine. So, Heritage House, we focus on historical, social, political, and recreational subjects, publishing books for both adults and young readers. We also publish guidebooks and the Amazing Stories series. Aggie and Mudgy is under the Wandering Fox imprint, which is middle grade novels. If you want to keep in touch with us, you can sign up for our monthly newsletter, follow us on social media, find all those links at heritagehouse.ca. So this event, although virtual, and you may be joining us from anywhere in the world, it does take place on the land of Indigenous peoples, and we'd like to recognize that. Heritage House Publishing is located within the traditional territories of the Lekwugan, including the Esquimalt and Songhees nations, Malahat, Pachidat, Chianu, Suk, and Wasanich peoples. If you know where you're joining, if you know the traditional lands you're on and want to put those in the chat, let us know, or just let us know what part of the world you're joining us from. So Wendy and Catherine are going to chat a bit about the book. Wendy's going to read some passages, and then there'll be questions and answers at the end. So put those in the chat. If you're watching live on YouTube or Facebook, you can put those in and we'll find them later. And if you're as excited about the book as we are, you can absolutely buy copies. We're really proud to partner with Monroe's Books in Victoria for this event. So if you want a signed copy, you can get it from Monroe's. You can also request a personalization, which is a great gift idea. And Monroe's has shipping available. So if you don't live in Victoria and still want a signed copy, you can get that. So I'm going to introduce our host, Catherine Lang, and author Wendy Proverbs, and then I will scoot off and let them take it away. Catherine Lang is the author of Obon in I practiced this, Shimunezu. Is that right, Catherine?
That's close. It was Shimu Nizu.
A Community Remembered, and it's a creative nonfiction book that she wrote about the former Japanese Canadian community in Chemainus on Vancouver Island. The book won the Hubert Evans Nonfiction Award in 1997. And Catherine lives in Victoria, BC, and has worked as a newspaper reporter, freelance writer, and editor. She's currently writing a memoir about her niece, Michelle Lang, a Calgary Herald reporter. Michelle was covering Canada's mission in Afghanistan when killed by a roadside bomb in December 2009. Look forward to reading that, Catherine.
Thank you.
Wendy Proverbs, is an emerging Indigenous author of Casca Dene descent. She holds a BA and an MA in anthropology from the University of Victoria. Like thousands of Indigenous people across Canada, as an infant, she was caught in the sweeping scoop of Indigenous children taken from their birth families and was only reunited with biological family members as a young adult. Wendy has acted as a community liaison with Indigenous communities and strives to help younger generations, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous, learn about their past. So I'd like to turn it over to the two of you and have a wonderful event. And thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you, Monica.
Yes, thank you for that lovely introduction. And congratulations, Wendy, on the publication of Aggie and Mudgy.
Oh, thank you, Catherine. Thank you.
We're both very excited to be able to have a copy in our hands.
Absolutely.
And welcome to our listeners out there.
Yes. Hello, everyone.
I'd like to begin by asking you, who were Aggie and Mudgy?
For those of you who don't know, Aggie and Mudgy were my birth mother and my birth aunt. As you know, I was adopted as an infant, and I was never got to meet my birth mother as she had passed before I reconnected with my biological family when I was in my early 20s. And I must add that I was adopted into a loving family. They weren't Indigenous, but they were still a very loving family, and they continue to be a loving family. And I know I'm very fortunate because I know a lot of Indigenous children caught up in the foster care system were not as fortunate as I was.
I'd like you to tell us how you came to write this story.
Well, the seeds from this story began long time ago. Naturally, being adopted, you're always curious about where you come from and you know, what people you're from, especially being Indigenous. Growing up, I had no idea that I was part of the Cascadena First Nation. So around 2012, I came into possession of my aunt's memoir. And there was a section about when they were very young girls and they were taken away from their home community by a Catholic priest and traveled a very long distance to Lejac Residential School. And I knew when I read Aunt Aggie's memoir that it was an important story, and it was an important story to share.
Well, I certainly agree with that. Was a remarkable journey that these two little girls made, and I hope others will agree that it's a wonderful thing that you've brought this story into our world.
Thank you, Catherine.
In Aggie and Mudgy, you weave the story of this remarkable journey with a fictionalized account of a small family set in contemporary times.
Mm-hmm.
And the main characters in the fictional family are a grandmother, Nan, and her 8-year-old granddaughter, Maddie. I wonder if you could introduce us to Nan and Maddie with a short reading, Wendy.
Oh, I'd love to. With the Beatles playing in the background, Yellow Submarine is one of Maddie's favorites. Maddie and Nan settle into the cushy love seat with a bowl of lightly salted popcorn. Okay, is everyone comfy now? What story would you like to hear this evening? Maddie puts her index finger to pursed lips and thinks for a minute. Nan, can you tell me the story about that old crinkled photograph with the two little girls? During the summer, Maddie discovered the photograph tucked away in Nan's desk. Maddie is curious about the image of two young girls standing close together. The taller girl has her dark hair tied back and is obviously older than the shorter girl with braided hair. They each have a blanket. The older girl carries hers on her arm, and the younger one has hers wrapped around her shoulders. Their feet are covered in soft moccasins. Their cheeks are plump. Their eyes glance suspiciously at the camera. Maddie asks her mother about the photograph. Her mom said to ask her grandmother. When she asked her grandmother, Nan said she would tell her one day when she had more time. Maddie wonders if Nan has enough time now. Did you ever meet the girls in the wrinkly photograph? Inquires Maddie. Nan musters a smile. No, my dear, I never met the girls in the photograph, but I do know some things about them. She squeezes Maddie's hand and closes her eyes briefly. It is important for her granddaughter to know this story, yet she feels uneasy sharing it. Nan takes a deep breath and begins. A long time ago, there were two little girls who were sisters. The elder sister's name was McKinney, and the younger sister was Beep. They were very close, and Beep looked up to her big sister a lot. Their mother, Yanama, and their father, Long, named them. They lived far away in the north on the BC-Yukon border. They were Cascadena people.
So McKinney and Beep were the girls' Cascadena names.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's right.
And the girls hated the Christian names they were given,
That's right.
Agnes and Martha. Who can blame them? So they changed them to Aggie and Mudgy, which I
Yes.
just think is so,
Yeah.
ingenious little girls. Leaving their mother and community must have been really terrifying for the girls and heartbreaking for their mother.
Mm-hmm.
Their father had died in a hunting accident prior to this departure. And so their mother, Yanima, was on her own.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think Yanima had any idea what was going on?
I don't think my grandmother had any idea of the impact that residential schools would have on not only her children, but herself and her community. Yanima was very afraid to question a white priest in the community. His authority in the community was very powerful. There was also, at that time, you must remember, there was a legal threat against Indigenous parents who didn't send their children to school. They could have been jailed for that. So it was a very hard situation, right across our country,
Mm-hmm.
for Indigenous parents, community, and children. And we have to remember that colonization worked very effectively through both the government and the church together.
It most certainly did.
Yeah.
Yes. Could you read us the passage where Nan tells Maddie about this time?
Absolutely. Soon after Father Allard's arrival in late spring, he told Yanima that the girls had to go away to school. "I will take them to their new school, Yanima," he said. "They will learn to read and write and to worship our Almighty God," he said. Yanima just nodded. She was afraid of Father Allard and also fearful of the future. All of her friends and relatives were afraid of Father Allard too. She just didn't know how to stand up to him. I'm sure she was heartbroken knowing that Aggie and Mudgy would soon be taken from her. I wonder what Aggie and Mudgy thought about all of this, and why couldn't they go to school near their home, asked Maddie. In those days, there wasn't a school in their community, but there was a school in Whitehorse. It was much closer than the school that the priest took them to, so I really don't know why they had to go so far away from home. There are a lot of mysteries about how and why things happened the way they did. That's for sure, Maddie cries, crossing her arms indignantly. If someone came to take me away to school, I'd run and hide where no one could find me. And I would make sure they didn't find you too, Nan says, while giving Maddie a warm hug. Finally, the day came in July when the priest took Aggie and Mudgy away. Yanima could not bear to see the girls depart, so their brothers, along with their grandmother, saw them off at the edge of the river. Aggie, take care of Mudgy on your journey, their grandmother whispered in Casca as they waited for the riverboat to pick them up on the riverbank. Use your wits and do your best to keep her and yourself safe.
Wow. And that was the Liard River, I think, wasn't it, that they set out on?
Yes, their community, Delu, is sort of at the confluence of the Liard and the Dease River.
Right.
It's right, it's their backyard, basically.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And their major travel routes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yes.
Storytelling plays such an important role in many Indigenous cultures.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that you're telling Aggie and Mudgy's story through fictional grandmother and granddaughter in today's world. But the story that Nan tells Maddie isn't about their time in residential school. It's about this 1,600-kilometer journey that they make from their home community to the doors of Lejac Residential School. Could you read us a passage about the beginning of that journey?
Yes, just before I read the passage, I just want to speak on the distance that, that they were separated from their home community. And just to know that that really worked in favor of the church, separating young children from their homeland. It sort of facilitated assimilation into Canadian mainstream. The girls couldn't see their family on weekends, or, that family tie was cut. The relatives couldn't visit them in the Lejac school. It was just simply too far away. So I just want to make a note of that, the distance really worked for assimilation purposes.
And for quite a long time. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Okay. Do you think Aggie and Mudgy were upset, Nan? Do you think they asked the priest to take them back? I think the girls were quite sad to leave their family and the only home they had known. But at least they had each other, and maybe they thought it would be an adventure. Besides, they were most likely too shy and overwhelmed with their journey, so I suspect they wouldn't have dared say anything to the priest. I like to think that they passed the time on the river by noticing the scenery, watching for rapids, and maybe playing games as to what they could see on shore. Purple patches of slender fireweed lined the riverbanks with vibrant splashes of color in the summer months. I imagine that rounding a bend in the river, Aggie and Mudgy would guess what they might see. Maybe some more wildflowers and wild berries, or perhaps a mama bear and her cubs, a moose and her calf, or even a fox drinking at the river's edge. That sounds magical, Nan. How long were they on the riverboat? It took 6 full days, traveling by day and camping at night. Just imagine how bright the stars in the sky would appear to Aggie and Mudgy, for there were no bright city lights to interfere with the nightly constellations. The stars helped Aggie and Mudgy's ancestors by guiding them home when they were lost. The Cascadena saw elements of their origins in the nightly skies. Yanamon Long used to point to the sky and show the girls where to search for bear, moose, wolf trails, and thunderbirds. They especially loved showing their children the aurora borealis, or northern lights, in the winter. The winter night sky lit up in electric colors as their elders spoke of spirit guides dancing towards the next world.
Oh, wow. I just love that description.
Thank
so
you.
Beautiful. And that was just the first 6, that was the beginning of the first 6 days of their journey. Their journey goes on for quite a long time after that.
Really, it was 6 weeks that it took.
Yeah, it was in the 1920s, so the late 1920s. So travel wasn't what we know of it today.
That's correct. You have to remember, there wasn't a highway going into their community. The highway, the Alaska Highway, wasn't built until the Second World War. So really, the river, you traveled by boat, you walked. There were occasional bush planes coming in, but they certainly were very expensive and weren't really for the local folks to use.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So Aggie and Mudgy were taken away from their remote northern village and traveled with Father Allard, who is mean to them. Despite the dire consequences for the girls, you keep the tone light throughout the book. Could you say a few words about that, Wendy?
Well, I wanted to present the story in a non-threatening manner. That's part of the reason why I, used or wrote about this little family living in contemporary Vancouver. I think it serves as a reminder that many Indigenous peoples today are thriving and vibrant, contributing members to Canadian communities. Perhaps this is one of the reasons, ideally, I'd love to see a parent and child reading this story together, and likewise, a teacher and sharing this story in the classroom.
I think that's a perfect combination. When I was reading it, I thought of the days when I would read to my son, and how wonderful it was to be able to share stories together, and yes, in the classroom as well. In the fictional part of the story, Nan and Maddie share a love of art, and they go on many adventures together. It adds a lot of color and happiness, and is a lovely balance to the darker experience of the girls, Aggie and Mudgy, your birth mother and aunt. You also address misconceptions some Canadians may have about this shameful aspect of our history. In a dialogue with a little friend of Maddie's, Nan learns that his stepmother thinks Nan has exaggerated the story. As a non-Indigenous person, I'm interested in your thoughts on why some people have difficulty accepting what really happened.
Well, I think you have to remember that for a very long time, there was very little knowledge taught about Indigenous peoples, their history, etc., in our public school system. It was an appalling lack in our school system. For example, we could think of our former Prime Minister, Jean Chrétien, who used to be the Minister of Indian Affairs in the late 60s, early 70s. And he recently stated that he didn't know anything about abuse happening in residential schools. And he states this despite there being written evidence that, yes, abuse was ongoing. And he was sent these reports during his term as minister. Sadly, I think sometimes it's more convenient for some people just to kind of ignore this history of our dark past. But these days, talk of truth and reconciliation abounds. And I think education is the key for us to move forward, accepting the past and learning more about our history. Just on a more positive note, our new Governor General, Mary Simon, who I think is just wonderful, and I think she's really has a lovely approach to reconciliation, and she sees herself as, being trying to open dialogue and to open doors for people to understand and learn about our past. And what I do love, what she has said, that, this is not just an Indigenous issue, it's a Canadian issue for us all to address and move forward as partnerships.
Well, I couldn't agree more. That's wonderful. A positive way to open the doors to that dialogue, which is so important. I think we have time for another question or two. Could you tell us what happened to Aggie and Mudgy?
Yes. After they left Lejac Residential School, they moved to the Prince George area. They both found employment as domestic workers. As many of you know, residential schools really weren't training grounds for doctors and lawyers. So that's what they ended up working as domestic workers. Aggie eventually married. She had children. She raised a family in the Prince George area. Mudgy entered into 2 common law relationships and had 12 children. Of all the children at one time in their lives, they were involved in the foster care system, which of course I'm one of them. But it's also, you know, it's hard to picture them without having a sound support system. You know, even though they knew each other, they didn't have their family around them, you know, so sometimes their life was extremely difficult. And again, social services sort of stepped in and dictated what they could not do with their lives and with their children.
Mhm. Oh, that's such a difficult, really quite heartbreaking story. And I was thinking this morning about Aggie and Mudgy, and it came to me that they actually were very brave.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I just, you know, hold my hands up and honor them for having the strength to survive. You know, not only this journey with this priest, but the years they spent in residential school. I mean, very strong. And Aunt Aggie was the eldest sister, so I really, you know, have to thank her for being strong for Mudgy too, because Mudgy was the younger one and obviously looked up to her older sister. So, I mean, very brave young girls, very
Yes.
brave.
Yeah. Well, I think it's wonderful that you've brought their story to light, and while we know the consequences of their time in residential school were really very tragic, the story of how they came to be at residential school and the way you weave that story again in, you know, a contemporary family setting, with this loving relationship between a grandmother and her granddaughter, really I feel is kind of an inspirational message about the resilience of the human spirit.
Mhm.
That's very
Mhm.
much how I read it.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
absolutely.
very good, Wendy. um, so I wonder if anyone in our audience has any questions for Wendy.
Oh, there's Kim. Hi, Kim. Who illustrated the book? No, it wasn't me. Though I did have some input, I must admit that. The book cover, as you can see, and here we have the smaller version too, was done by Alyssa Koski. And she's very talented. And she also did the illustrations that are the chapter headings with each chapter. I don't know if you can see this, but each chapter has sort of a little black and white illustration to give you a taste of what the chapter holds. But the cover, Alyssa worked about 5 or 6 illustrations, and we sort of settled on this one, and then I added a little bit of input to it. And you'll notice there's a white and a red star. And in one of the chapters, there is a Casca legend, which that relates to. So if you're curious about why there's a red and a white star on the sky, that's why.
It's a beautiful cover, and I love the illustrations inside as well.
Yes, yes, it's very, very nice. I love it too. Very happy with it.
Mm-hmm. Nice work, Alyssa. There is another question.
Oh, hi, Marie. Marie from Quesnel. Very nice. Will there be sequels? I don't know if there'll be a sequel as such, though an idea percolating that was suggested to me by Laura Kordick, who is the editor of Heritage House, is working on a version for younger readers, probably age 4 to 8, which is more of a picture book. And obviously the content would be, I don't know, diluted or, more geared for that age group than this current book is. But thank you for that question.
Mhm.
Good.
Not diluted, perhaps, more age
Yeah,
appropriate.
more age appropriate.
Yeah.
That's what I
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's always hard to find the right word sometimes.
Yeah.
If we don't have any more questions at the moment, you have another book idea as well as the one that for the younger readers.
That's right. I have an idea percolating about adoption. I just, obviously I'm adopted, but I feel that adoption is very prevalent out there, not just in my small family circumstances. It impacts many, many people, Indigenous and non-Indigenous. So I think this idea for, probably a middle school grade readers as well about adoption, employing some humor in it so that it's not just too dry and stiff. So
Right.
that's at the back of my mind too.
Uh-huh. Yes. Well, that would be a wonderful project and an important story to tell as well.
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely. Like I
Yes.
said, it impacts so many people in the world. So it's,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. Right. Oh, how did you come up?
oh, there's another
Mhm.
question.
Mhm.
How did I come up with the idea to take the unique approach to the story? Well, that's a good question. I think I wanted it a little, what's the word, relatable. So that's why I employed the grandmother and the granddaughter. There are some elements of me in Nan, if anybody has guessed.
Yes.
And I just thought it would be easier to kind of sneak in some, true history of Indigenous peoples through my little contemporary family. I just thought it would be a little more digestible to not only middle school grade readers, but, older readers like us as well.
Yes. Yes. And it really is a marvelous approach. And I can attest to the fact that, there is a fair bit of Wendy in the character Nan, although you don't have an 8-year-old granddaughter.
Not yet.
You do have grandchildren.
I have 2 grandsons and they're adorable. William and Jacob. Their ages are 3 and 1, and they bring a lot of joy to our lives.
Uh-huh. Yes. Every time Wendy talks about her grandchildren, her whole face lights up. Ah, okay. Oh,
Okay, here's the question. What research did I do to write Aggie and Mudgy's part of the story? And when writing the contemporary part? The research I did started a long time ago with church records from the Cascadena First Nation up in Lower Post. There were church records and there were also census records, but they weren't really in depth at any means. They really just gave, names, some birth dates, and some birth dates. Some people had 3 or 4 birth dates. So you've got to remember, back in the 1920s, 30s, the records weren't really kept up as we would consider they are today, obviously. So it really wasn't until I received a copy of my aunt's memoir that these pieces kind of fell together, and really, the true facts of their journey, of their young lives. And I could, you know, pull from her memoir these true facts and then overlaid it with the fictional family. And the fictional family, obviously there was some research, I have to present it as really being a contemporary family. There is a university not far from where they live in Vancouver, and really when Nan is talking to Maddie about the history of, let's, for an example, Stanley Park, and the historical names and who lived in those territories. I definitely had to do some research to make sure the facts were accurate.
Well, yes, fascinating. There's a lot more work behind the telling of the story than it would appear, and you did a wonderful job, Wendy.
Oh, thank you very much.
The other people, oh, yeah, is there another passage you'd like to read?
I don't know.
Well, while you think about that, I just thought I'd mention that while Nan and Maddie are the main characters in the fictional family, you introduce us also to Maddie's mother and a neighbor who turns out to be Métis, and he's quite an interesting, rather eccentric, kind of odd character. And you weave some really beautiful stories about the different interactions. So maybe you'd like to read something about Mr. Rupert.
I can do that. Let me just find the passage. Also, I just wanted to mention there's I'm going to hold it up. You can see it. There is a great map at the beginning of the book, and it really shows the distance that the girls traveled. And, again, thank you for Heritage House for detailing that map so accurately from Dayloo all the way to the shores of Fraser Lake where the school was.
Maybe I can try to find, oh, here's something. Well, this is a passage about Maddie's little friend. And when Lucas comes around, he comes around at convenient times.
He does. I think he has a good sniffer.
Yes. I don't know if you want to read that passage, but it's on page
52.
Yes.
Okay.
51, 52.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. I think some mini apple pies are in order, Nan says to herself. Lucas can take one home, and Mr. Rupert will be pleasantly surprised as well. Later on, Maddie, Lucas, and Buskers bounce into the kitchen. Ooh, yum, I smell something good, shouts Lucas. That's Nan's apple pie. Isn't it a great smell? I wish I could paint that smell. What an idea. Golden yellow and cinnamon on canvas, Maddie says dreamily. I wish my stepmom could bake. She buys stuff from the grocery store, but it never smells like this, says Lucas. Well, Lucas, there's a mini apple pie with your name on it in the oven. It'll be out soon, says Nan. Thank you, Nan, beams Lucas. While you're waiting, I'll make some cocoa for us, says Nan. With marshmallows, please, Maddie says with a grin. Would I ever forget marshmallows? Nan asks, her hands on her hips as she leans towards Maddie. Maddie catches the twinkle in her Nan's eyes and puts her arms around her grandmother's waist. I love you, Nan. You always think of everything. Hey, I've got an idea while we're waiting, Nan. Can you continue with the story, please? I'm not sure Lucas would be interested, Nan says, looking at the tousled top of his ginger hair. Sure I would, exclaims Lucas. Maddie's told me all about Aggie and Mudgy. Has she? And what do you think of the story, Lucas? It's kind of exciting, Nan. It's kind of sad in parts too, but I think it's so cool that they're on an adventure, Lucas replies. I'd love to be on an adventure in the wilderness, just not with that mean priest.
That's a lovely, yeah. I became quite fond of Lucas as I was reading the story as well.
He's everybody's little favorite brother, I think.
Yeah, totally. Huh. Well,
just
oh,
in case
yes.
anybody's interested about what's happened to Lejac Residential School. It was operated from 1922 to 1976 by the Roman Catholic Church. When it closed in 1976, the land was transferred to the local Nadli Wooten First Nation. So when they took over, they made the decision to tear down the building. So really all that remains now is the cemetery, and there's a Rose Prince Memorial. And Rose Prince was a student at Lejac for most of her life, and she actually worked at Lejac as well afterwards. So, you know, I know that they occasionally, former students of the school do meet occasionally at the site. And I know in the past spring they did meet to honor the discovery of the children that were found in the grounds of the Kamloops Residential School. So it's still there, but it's the school building itself has gone.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Actually, talking about that, you mentioned to me that Aggie and Mudgy had a much younger brother who attended the school as well. Would you like to tell us about that?
Yes. He would have been my uncle, and his name was Paul. He was probably just born or very young when Aggie and Mudgy left their community. He was taken to Lejac Residential School, I think around 1935. He was sent home in 1938 because he came down with tuberculosis, which, as many of you know, was quite prevalent in residential schools. And sadly, he was sent home in 1938 and he died because of tuberculosis in his home community.
Right.
Yeah.
That's so sad. And there's no way of knowing whether Aggie and Mudgy even knew when he was at the school that he was their brother.
You know, they kept, you know, brothers and sisters were totally segregated at all times, you know, so, you know, and they may have sort of just been on their way out of the school as he was coming in. So sadly, I don't know if they ever knew. And that's a terrible thing in itself, isn't it?
Absolutely.
You know, so
Yeah.
yeah. Now, there was another question. Oh, yeah. Oh, hi, Pat. Nice to hear from you. Was my aunt's memoir published? No, it wasn't published. It was self-published. What happened, from what I understand, is a friend of hers who was a member of the church transcribed her life. So, you know, I imagine they sat down together, and whether there was a tape recorder or not, I'm not sure. So it wasn't really published. It was just sort of self-published for family members, from what I understand.
Right. Yes. And there's a picture of your Aunt Aggie on the cover of it.
Yes, a photocopy picture. It's a little faded, but you know, and I think we should mention, even though I never got to meet my birth mother, she had passed before I was able to. I was able to meet my Aunt Aggie on two occasions. One was in the late 80s at a wonderful celebration. It was actually my youngest sister's wedding, Karina. Sadly, another occasion was about 5 years later at the funeral for my sister Karina. But I do cherish those two times that I got to sit and chat with Aunt Aggie.
Yeah. Wow. And you're in touch with some of your birth siblings now.
Yes. I've been fortunate. I've met 6 of my siblings. Sadly, a couple have passed. I'm probably closest to my sister Barb. Hi, Barb. I know you're out there somewhere. Barb and her family, they live in Seychelles. And, Barb and I were very fortunate to travel up to Dalu. About 2014, we were up for the annual general meeting in July. And it was quite moving. And, for us as two sisters going back to the home community where 2 sisters were forced to leave many years earlier. So hopefully we'll be able to go up together again, and maybe with our children or grandchildren.
There's the sequel.
Oh.
Yes. Because Aggie and Mudgy didn't return to their home community.
Oh, well, actually, Mudgy did go back once just before her mother, Yanama, passed. She went back once, and I believe Aunt Aggie went back twice. I believe she went back once as, I'm not sure if she was just released from Lejac or I'm not clear on the dates. And I know she also went back with her eldest son and went back to the community to reintroduce herself and her son. But it's hard. It's hard for children taken away for so long and trying to integrate their way back into a community that's, they've lost the language, they've lost their connections. So, it's very challenging in some ways to go back and try to be a part again.
I can't imagine.
Yeah.
It must have been.
Yeah.
Oh, well, if there aren't any more questions, maybe now's a good time to just thank you again for bringing Aggie and Mudgy's story to us, and congratulations on a job very well done.
Oh, thank you. And it's been an honor to have you, Catherine, here. I just, and to all friends and family, thank you. And a big thank you to Heritage House Publishing and to Monroe's Books. Support your local independent bookstores. And also, I just want to say I'm proud to be Casca, and Masi Cho to everyone.
Masi Cho.
Thank you so much, Wendy and Catherine. That was a lovely chat. If you're joining us watching the recording, we hope you enjoyed it. And thank you to all the people who joined us live. We enjoyed your company, although virtual. I'm sure we'll be able to gather sometime soon, fingers crossed, and celebrate Aggie and Mudgy's journey in person. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Monica.
Thank you.